Well, what we're really dealing with is a system for searching for leadership for what is probably the most important institution in the world, the United States government. And that search system is broken.
That was John Rauh, founder of JustSixDollars.org. Like many of us, John is alarmed about the power of money in our political system. Candidates for president have already spent 2/3 more on TV ads than last time around and are about to break all-time overall spending records. The difference between John and many of us is that he sees a solution, and he recently told me about it.
Our purpose is very simple: to change the way we finance federal elections, the Congress and the White House, from the current system that depends on private financing to a voluntary public funding system.
Tell us where this name, Just $6, comes from.
Well, Just $6 came from our realizing how inexpensive it would be for the federal government to publicly fund congressional and presidential elections. We can publicly fund all federal elections for a little under $2 billion a year. So where'd the Just $6 come from? Well, why don't we divide 300 million citizens, which is where we are today, we're a big country, by 1.8 billion, and we come up with just $6. Now, let me be clear. We're not suggesting everybody dump $6 into the bucket. Is that clear, Frankie?
Yeah,
it's a way of saying, hey, this isn't very expensive. Yeah. In Senator Durbin and Senator Specter's bill, the money comes from the sale of future broadcast spectrum.
So, John, let's start with where we are right now. And what is the obstacle to my running for office, say, if that were my desire? I mean, how much does it take, and how has that changed over the last, say, 10 or 20 years?
Well, it's increased, Frankie, dramatically over the last 10 or 20 years. Today, you run for the United States House of Representatives, the threshold is probably $1 million. If you raise $100,000 or $200,000 and are not known, run for the U.S. House, you're not going to get known, because the public really depends primarily on television. The internet's making some impact. Hope it makes more.
And for the presidential election, what are we talking about? How much does it take to get in the game?
Well, for the presidency, as we can see in this 2008 election in the primary, the current public funding system, which is unsatisfactory for presidential candidates in a primary, limits their spending to $50 million. You run for president of the United States, after the first 4 states at $50 million, you'll be broke. You might as well stay home. So the bill that Senators Feingold and Collins have introduced now takes that up to $125 million, which is about the range it would take for a primary, and then the grant in the general is around $100 million.
If you have it voluntary, so that somebody can come in who's a multi-millionaire, billionaire, can't they just overwhelm the public funding candidate?
That's a very key question. We have studied for years, election after elections in America, and what we've learned is the following. If we publicly fund high enough so the voters can learn about an unknown candidate who qualifies, you have to have a qualifier, enough for the voters to learn about an unknown candidate who qualifies, that money spent by somebody with their own wealth way above that means very little. In other words, you can't buy an election, but you sure can lose an election if you don't have enough.
Because the impression that people have in this country is that the big bucks always win.
They sure
So you're challenging that.
I'm challenging that, and what I'm saying is counterintuitive. It's a belief if you got this much money and you're running against a candidate with this much money, this one wins. Not so.
Under voluntary public financing, there would be a lot of money then going to support candidates who qualify. But ultimately, a lot of that is spent paying the major media.
This is a market economy, right? Capitalism is part of our democratic system. Now, I have to tell you that in the Durbin-Specter bill, there is a discount towards the end of a campaign that candidates for the United States Congress and the presidency get a discount on broadcast media. Of course, we own the airwaves, so that's going to hold up in court.
Getting the influence of money out of the system and new leadership in and citizens believing in our democracy again, that sounds like a real bargain. And how would you compare that to the costs that we're paying as taxpayers for a system where there allows so much influence by private money?
Well, obviously it's an estimate, it's a guess, one can't be sure. But let me just put on the table that earmarks today are running in excess, well in excess, of $100 a U.S.
Yeah, earmarks are? Pork, meaning just some personal favorite little project.
Well, these are favorite projects. Not all of them are bad. Not all earmarks, which are called pork, are bad, but some are. And I don't think there's any question that with voluntary public funding, with special interests not being able to buy influence, that we will see meaningfully less earmarks, less pork.
John, you've mentioned pork and that cost to us as taxpayers, but for my money, the first thing that comes to my mind are the huge multi-billion-dollar subsidies to large agribusiness for creating products that then are not necessarily the best thing for the world or for our own diets, or subsidies of fossil fuels that actually end up generating more heating of our planet. So I would add in not just the literal pork problem, but so much of the subsidies and tax loopholes that benefit corporations, that also, if we truly had fair elections in which it was really clear that the control of money was out and citizens' voices were in the process and everyday people could run, that that kind of influence would be out of the system and we would be saving billions and billions, hundreds.
Well, that kind of special interest influence would be out.
These people are elected by us, they're paid by us, and yet they're having to spend so much of their time. How much do you estimate that people that we elect are actually out there raising money instead of doing our business?
Simpson says, you can't believe what it's like on an afternoon in the United States Senate when you have a bill in front of a committee the next day, the next morning, and you can't bring together the 5 or 6 sponsors of the bill with you. He says, you know where they are? They're downtown with the lobbyists at the Hilton or the Mayflower. And he said, oh, the shrimp are terrific. You know, but hey, I need them here to plan for the meeting tomorrow. Or they're in Detroit or Houston or wherever, raising money and taking the jet home that night. He said he believes, and others do also, we're talking about at least 30% of the time of the incumbents in the United States Congress spent raising money.
The Supreme Court seems to have always found a problem when it comes to getting money out of the system. And I'm just afraid that they're going to say no to this too, and then we're going to be back to square one again.
Voluntary public funding cherishes speech. It cherishes the most beautiful value in America. First, it says that those who don't have their own financial resources or can't raise them, if they qualify by getting enough $5 checks, they can speak. And today, most challengers don't have the money to speak to the voters. And secondly, it says, we don't have to restrict speech. Let the debate take place. It's voluntary. Just be sure the candidates have enough so that the public can learn about them. So I believe there will quietly be in the private quarters of the United States Supreme Court a voice vote of yay when voluntary public funding passes.
So John, my hunch is that as public financing progresses, and now we see it working in 2 states and about to be 3, that as candidates choose to run with public financing, that they then are seen as elevated in stature in the eyes of potential voters, because they are choosing not to take private money, and so that gives them an advantage. And so is that how it would grow? Do you think that's an important factor?
My sense is that your intuitive is right. And Governor Napolitano of Arizona, who ran in her first election and second on public funding, voluntary public funding, Governor Napolitano believes that her opponent who took private money was hurt when it came to election day because he was taking private special interest money. Can we prove that? No, Frankie, but I think your intuitive is right. It's working very well in Arizona and Maine. In Maine, for example, over 80% of those elected to the legislature were elected with voluntary public funds, and they are just delighted with it.
So what would you want each of us, every American citizen, to do now?
What do I want you to do?
Yeah, all of us. You know, who said, this is it. I want to have fair, clean elections.
Every American to go to our website and sign on. Together, we're going to bring about this change, and I think what we will see long term is a far healthier democracy in our country.
John, this has helped me so much to understand such a critical issue. Thank you. Thank you.